All right, let's start this one off with saying I was wrong, okay? I did a video recently talking about the data mine cards, and we were talking about High Evolutionary, a very exciting card. A card that I actually had a lot of praise to say about it. But I did say one negative thing. I said that when you play the 4-7, because that's the body, the stat line of High Evolutionary, when you actually play it, not the effect, just the card, it's going to feel underwhelming. And I actually use some words like terrible. And I'm here to tell you I was wrong in saying that. But putting that card aside, I decided to look at the stat lines of all of the cards in Marvel Snap. And there's some really interesting trends that are occurring here. So what I did is I broke it up into 4 sections of tiers, you could say. Tiers, 4 tiers of stat lines that are present in Marvel Snap, okay? So I'm going to go over each. We're going to start with vanilla, okay? So you know these cards. You get them right at the start of the game. Well, most of them anyhow. So you have your Wasp, a 0-1, Misty Knight, a 1-2, Shocker, 2-3, Cyclops, 3-4, Thing, 4-6, Abomination, 5-9, and Hulk is a 6-12. So these are a general frame, right, for the cost to power ratio in Marvel Snap, right? General. But we can't look at it in too much detail. We can't say that, the Thing compared to, let's say, a card like White Queen, who share the same cost and power totals, we can't say that the Thing is always worse than White Queen in every single scenario. That's just not the case. White Queen has an on reveal, which can be countered by Cosmo, right? So there's that as a present factor. But then there's also, of course, Patriot. And Patriot can get his ongoing doubled. He can get copied by Mystique. And then all of a sudden, your Thing is now a 410 or whatever, crazy power total, right? So it's not exact science. It's just a placeholder, a guide for the stats. And I think it holds true when they design cards. They look at, these vanilla cards and they decide, are we going to go over the vanilla standard or below the vanilla standard based on the card's ability? So that's what we have here. We have offset negative. These are cards with low power and strong abilities below the vanilla standard. Okay, so Iron Man being a 5-0, incredibly powerful ability, right? But if you compare him to Abomination, his cost level vanilla card, right? Abomination is a 5-9, right? So 9 more power than Iron Man, but you never see Abomination played a whole bunch because the ability is so strong. And that's where I have to make a very important point, and I really hope you guys listen. I am not here to tell you that certain cards are better or worse based on their cost to power ratio. That has nothing to do with this. We are not talking about the power levels of these cards. We are simply analyzing trends in the cost to power ratios, right? In the card design space, okay? So Iron Man, fantastic card, but it is below the vanilla standard. It does have low power, literally 0, but it has an incredibly strong ability. So that is offset negative. Premium are cards with slightly above the vanilla standard and abilities that have a degree of risk. Okay, so it's not always a bad ability in my experience and from what I've seen. So we can look at Polaris as an example. She's going to pull over a 1 or 2 cost card on your opposing side of the field to that location. Now that could be really bad. Maybe you pulled over a Sunspot and it has crazy power and they're happy for it that you did that. Or maybe it's really good because you pulled it over and you had Kingpin and you destroyed it or something like that, right? So there's highs and lows of that effect, okay? But then also she has a 3-5 stat line, which if we look at Cyclops, who's the vanilla card, he has a 3-4. She has 1 point of power more than the vanilla standard. And that's what I'm basing premium off of. Any cards that have 1 point of power more and an ability that isn't too, terrible. It's not a bad ability. It can work out positively in some case scenarios. So the premium stat line looks like this: a 1-3, 2-4, 3-5, 4-7, 5-10, 6-13. Okay, just like I said, 1 point from each of these cards above me, 1 point above the vanilla standard. And then we have Offset Plus, which is cards with high powers and abilities that require support. So if you look at Infinite, he needs a whole lot of support, right? Because he requires you to pass on the turn prior, which is usually your turn 5. And then you got to just play him on turn 6. So you can't just play 20 power for 6 energy in any instance in Marvel Snap, right? There's an additional toll, an additional cost, or an additional risk, right? There's going to be a few cards that we're going to get to in this category, but they always have above premium power. So Infinite having 20, that is 8 points of power more than the Hulk. Okay, So that's how I've kind of framed these 4 tiers of stat lines that are present in Marvel Snap. And we're going to go through every cost of card, right? So we're going to go from 0 all the way to 6, and we're going to look at some of the trends that are present in each of those cost ranges, okay? So let's get to it. All right, and starting it off, we have 0 energy cards. Obviously, there's only 2 in Marvel Snap. And we cannot go below energy. They'll never have like where you have, I don't know, a -1 energy card where you receive energy when you play the card. That'd be crazy. Could you imagine the effect that would have to have? It'd have to be like immediately lose a location or something along those lines, right? I don't even know. That's a wild example. But right now there's 2, okay? So we have our vanilla card in Wasp, and then we have Yellow Jacket, who is an offset plus because you're doubling the power. It has 1 point of power more, okay? But I feel like this one's an anomaly because it is doubling. So this is the one instance, that's why I'm getting it out of the way, where it's a little bit weird, where I put in offset plus because I feel like a premium stat line, honestly, it just doesn't work with 0. We're in too small of numbers to play with where these costs to power ratios don't quite work. So I have Yellow Jacket as an offset plus. Pretty bad ability, but if nothing else is there, you can play it and then it's fine. So maybe it could be a premium card. I mean, I'm kind of cheating here, but anyways, it could go either way. But that's an example, okay? Let's get to 1 energy cost. All right, so this is where it gets a lot more interesting. So we have our vanilla card, right? In Misty Knight, a 1/2, which is an incredible good ratio, right? That's 50% more. Like you have a 1 energy for 2 power. Like we only see that in the vanilla cards until Hulk as a 6/12. He actually wasn't always that way too, which is wild. But anyways, Misty Knight, she's here to save the city. Okay, so our offset negatives. So we have the Hood, Ant-Man, Squirrel Girl, and a bunch others, right? I'm only putting 3 as examples, okay? But anytime we're talking about lower power, there's a lot of those cards in Marvel Snap. It gets a lot more interesting when they have higher power than the premium or the vanilla standard, right? So with the Hood, right, it's a 1 -2, but you get a demon. That's fantastic. There's like bounce synergies there. There's destroy synergies because you can destroy this. It's a 1 cost, blah, blah, blah. The demon is 1 in 6 in power. So when you put that together, it's like a 1/4 or 2/4 rather, if you play both, which is actually pretty good as well. Then you have the Ant-Man, who's a 1/4, but can get even buffed with more with like Spectrum and Onslaught and all these crazy things. So that's really good. But again, these have by standard, by default, right? Unless the conditions are met, they're going to have that lower power total for their cost. Squirrel Girl is immediate value. The squirrels pop out and it's basically like you played 1/3, but the locations are filled up and that's kind of a negative too, right? So that's kind of the offset there. So those are just a few examples of some of the lower power below the vanilla standard cards in the 1 energy slot. So then we have premium. Blade and Zero are our 2 premium cards. They're 1/3s and they're actually very good cards, right? That's a good stat line play. And the thing why they're in premium is because usually you're running it in a deck where their abilities are helping you, right? So that's just a better version of Misty Knight if you're not running a no ability deck, which funny enough, Zero is actually good in those kinds of scenarios, but he's usually trying to silence bad abilities of those offset plus cards, right? So Zero is really good. You get to choose when and how it happens. So that's pretty good unless it's like X-Mansion or pulled from your hand for some reason. Then you have Blade, discarding a card. In discard decks, you pretty much always want to do that. With the Lockjaw cycle, it's fantastic. Sometimes this card is cut, but for the most part, you're getting a 1/3, which is just good value, right? And then you get discard a card if your deck is built for it. Offset plus, we have Ebony Maw, and one of the newer-ish cards is Titania, okay? So Ebony Maw is a 1/7. That's way above the vanilla standard. That's 5 points above. That's wild, dude. He's an incredible value, but his ability is twofold. You can't play this after turn 3, but you also ongoing, you can't play cards here. So to offset that crazy restriction, he gets a lot of power. But we see this work a lot, right? With Zero, for instance, who's another premium card. That combination is kind of wild. It's funny, another trend that you're going to notice is a lot of the discard cards and the removing of the abilities, because that seems and that carries a negative connotation, they get the premium stat line. They get more stats because their abilities seem bad, but the decks they're running are happy for it. It's a bit of a weird thing, and it ends up being a little bit too powerful maybe. So Zero and Ebony Maw in tandem are really good, and Zero and Titania in tandem are really good, making Zero just kind of a crazy card all around for these offset plus these high power cards with bad abilities, because you're just going to remove it and it's straight value. Titania is flipping around. Actually, hers isn't even that bad because you can set up scenarios where your opponent's like location locked. And then that's great. And then you play a card and you get Titania on turn 6. But it's still inherently risky and you might give your opponent a lot of power. So that's why she ends up with 5 power to her 1 cost. It's pretty wild. Okay, so that's the 1 energies. Just talking about those really briefly. Let's go into 2. All right, in the 2 drops, we have Shocker. He's going to blast us away with his 2-3 stat line. I don't think so. When you compare that to Misty Knight at 1-2, you're kind of looking sad over there, Shocker, and a lot less tempting to play. But you become a 2-4 with Patriot, so that's not too shabby. All right, so your premium stat line here is 2-4. Okay, so let's start with the offset negatives. We have Angela, Psylocke, Luke Cage, and a whole bunch. Anything underneath, fantastic value. Angela, you play more cards. You easily crush the premium stat line by playing 3 cards. You get 6 power. It's so good. Psylocke giving you ramp. I mean, energy bonus is just value through the roof, right? Luke Cage works in those kind of decks where you don't want that negative power. You play Hazmat and all that stuff. It can make for some big swings and actually might end up saving you more power than you could ever get if he had it built into his kit. Like if he was a 2-4 but didn't have that ability, probably less value than what he produces. But the premium cards, so we have 2-4 in Mysterio, who used to be a 2-5 joining Lizard in the offset plus, but he is now a 2-4 premium card and pretty good value. He does clog up 3 slots. And if you're not buffing those illusions, and he ends up taking 3 spots for 4 power. So that's kind of how that falls together. Clean Wing, another discard card, finding itself in the premium stat line, right? And this one's targeted, which is almost better because if you're rocking, Swarm or whatever else, like you get to focus that. Wolverine, for instance. So that really, really good card. The discard package, it's funny that it doesn't end up being as meta as it could be. It's probably because of the inconsistencies in the discard inherently, but they do have good power to cost ratios. Then you have Cloak. Next turn, he's going to move both cards. So if this was only for you, or sorry, rather, you can move cards to his location on the next turn. If this was only for you, they wouldn't have a 2-4 stat line, right? That'd be too good. But because your opponent has the choice to move the cards over, and then you don't know where their power is going, it ends up being a premium statted card. And then we have Lizard. So isn't this a fascinating one? Because Lizard was not very good in beta. Nobody was really playing Lizard. He got buffed from a 2-4 to a 2-5. And now he's everywhere. Don't you see this card everywhere? It might be because of like the Shuri Red Skull thing and just like having good cards, It's just like, whatever. If my opponent plays 4 cards there, then they put in too much effort than it took me to play a 2-5 with like marginal downside. Like it'll remove its 3 power, whatever. But then it does fall below the vanilla standard, right? So it's an interesting card there, but it is the only 2-drop that is, offset above, well above the vanilla standard. All right, and then we have the 3 drops. So to start it off, we have Cyclops, which is widely regarded as one of the weaker cards in Marvel Snap. I honestly don't really think so because there's the Patriot buffs. He's not too bad in Patriot decks because he's not too expensive. I find the more expensive cards are hard to run in Patriot. But with other synergies in Silver Surfer. Actually, one of the decks I got to Infinite, I was running Cyclops. So I don't think the card is all that bad. It just requires support. And if you don't have those support cards, early on, then he's pretty brutal. I'll be honest. Because a 3-4 stat line is not exciting, right? It's not exciting at all, especially when we look at these offset plus cards. Look at these, okay? So very, very interesting. Maximus, 3-7, fantastic. Such good value. You give your opponent 2 cards, they get to draw 2 cards. Honestly, in the most scenarios, not a huge deal. So it works out beautifully. Then you have Black Cat. That is a little bit different. She's a 3-7. If she's in your hand at the end of the turn, you discard it. Making it very hard to actually get the value of that offset power increase, right? So that one's a little bit trickier. If it's turn 1, turn 2, she gone. Doesn't even matter, right? Maybe in Helidex it works a bit, but for the most part, very difficult card to play, which is why she doesn't see a whole lot of play. And then we have Swordmaster, and I'm putting him in the offset plus because the premium stat line in this scenario, being 1 point above Cyclops here, is a 3-5. But Swordmaster is a 3-6. And if you were noticing any of the trends in the past, we had Blade and Clean Wing in the premium slot. But Swordmaster makes an extra jump. He goes to offset plus. So I don't know what that's all about. It's interesting. It's interesting to see. He's just doing the same thing. Discard a card from your hand. There's an inherent bit of randomness. He is a good card. I think he ends up getting run in a lot of discard packages. But for the most part, yeah, he makes the cut. It's really interesting. And they're the only 3 in that tier of offset plus. And then premium, we only have 2. We have Deathlock and Polaris. Now, they have good stat lines and they work in their respective decks, right? But, Deathlock backfire sometimes. Maybe it got moved somehow, like Asteroid M, or who knows, right? It gets moved, you destroy what you didn't want to. Bummer. Okay, so sometimes it's not that great to destroy things. Maybe the locations don't let you either, so that's not so great. But for the most part, usually you're running Deathlock in a destroy deck and you want to do that, so it's usually good and it has good stats. That's how you come to that stat line. You got Polaris, on reveal, move an opposing 1 or 2 cost card. I already kind of mentioned it, but sometimes it's not all that great. Sometimes it's absolutely fantastic. So there you go. Those are your premium 3 energy cards. I thought this was an especially interesting tier because Cyclops is so garbo in most scenarios, and then Swordmaster actually makes the cut. It's a weird shift in energy to cost ratios. Okay, so let's check out 4 energy, which is the one that I was getting roasted about. All right, here are our 4 energy cards. We have the Thing, right? 4/6, so that being the vanilla standard, and there is one card, at least it's not even out yet, but there is one card new that breaks the vanilla standard by 1 point, and that is High Evolutionary. It's a good stat line, it turns out. Now, I still kind of hold the opinion that even playing a premium card, right, a premium statted card with no additional effect at the moment of playing it doesn't feel that good. But I'll only know that when it's actually in the game. You can see how I kind of came to that conclusion of not really knowing if it's good or not because it doesn't exist. There's no other card that's a 4/7 in Marvel Snap, but we'll find out. We'll find out. I mean, obviously it's good because of the ability at the start of the game. That's fantastic, worth running. I just don't know how it's going to feel when you play the body. Anyways, okay, that's your premium static card in this tier. Then we have the offset negative. We have cards like Mr. Negative. He is inherently such a problem for this entire video in ratios, right? Because it flips everything on its head. All of a sudden, those cards I was talking about that are offset negatives, they switch and then they're like offset positives, but with good abilities. Like, it's just crazy what Mr. Negative can do, but obviously there's inherent risk. You have to draw the cards. You got to play them early enough, that sort of thing. And he has -1 power to offset the fact that he costs 4 and has a crazy ability, crazy good ability when built in the right deck, right? Dracula, same deal. Dracula almost is never 0 power unless you hit a 0 power card in your hand. But why are you doing that? You're probably hit that Apocalypse, which is at like 12, 16 power, right? So then it becomes a 4/16. Then we have Shuri, and we got to talk about Shuri, right? Because she's probably the best card in the game now. Now that Arrow has been smacked in the face with nerfs, Shuri dodged them all. She is just crazy because she's a 4/2, but she's offset from her insane ability. Honestly, let's be real. She should probably not be a 4/2. I'm not going to go ahead and say what I think she should be, but it should be different because her ability makes it so that basically she's getting a return of sometimes like 15 plus power. So she's like a 4 to like 20 in a lot of scenarios, right? With whatever she ends up doubling. That's an exaggerated example, but you've been there. I'm sure you've played against it. So those are your offset negatives, and there's a whole bunch more. And then the offset positives, we have Typhoid Mary, Atuma, Sentry, and Crossbones was the other one, right? So 4 actually in this tier. We know that Marvel Snap Teen Second Dinner loves their 4/10s. So, or any card that can end up being a 4/10, right? You look at Dazzler or stuff like that. But Typhoid Mary, she's going to give -1 power to all your other cards. If you don't remove that ability, you know, or you're not running like a Luke Cage, then that sucks. And then we have Atuma. He's going to literally destroy himself if anyone else is chilling in his location, unless it's Armor, Professor X, or anything like that, or like a location that where things can't be destroyed, like Wakanda. So he's a 4/10 because he will literally implode if anything else is played there. Okay, makes sense. The Sentry is a wild one, and you know, once again, wildly regarded as one of the weaker cards in Snap because he's a 4/8, but he's going to summon a -8 on your side of the board on the far right, and you can't even play this on the right. So it's location restricted, gives you an offset, literally even keel of power, and for what? Like, it's crazy. Obviously, there's Viper synergies. You want to move it over or destroy synergies. But then you also, because of this, need to like combine it with things like, oh my gosh, the support that's needed to make this card work is just not there. Easily should be a 4/10 in my opinion. But there you go. Those are the 4 cost cards. Okay, and now it's time for 5 energy cards. I find it gets more interesting as we go along. So with 5 energy, the offset negatives, there's plentiful. Now, one of the problems when Arrow was so popular is because there's a lot of underwhelming 5 drops. And look at this right now. There's only 1 premium and there's only 1 offset plus. There are not a lot of 5 drops that have, you know, bad abilities but really good power totals. I don't know what that says about about Snap or the current meta, possibly, but it's there. That's a thing. There's a lot of cards in the offset negative. These are only 3 cards, but there's plenty. Almost the entire set of cards, aside from Dr. Oct, Red Skull, and Abomination, are below, right? So you got Iron Man, incredible ability. Arrow, even though she was buffed, she's still lower than the vanilla standard, right? But her ability is pretty good, I think. Even after playing her since nerf, she seems pretty good. Hobgoblin, obviously, he's a bit of an anomaly. You know, you could almost call him a 5/8 because he's giving you an 8 power swing on the board. But still, that is below the vanilla standard, right? But what is above? So we have Octopus, 1 point above. But he's going to pull 4 random cards from your opponent's hand to this side of the location. How many times have you played this card and it's totally backfired? I know I have plenty. Infinite, whatever else, armor probably with their Infinite, so I can't even Shang-Chi it, etc., etc. It's brutal. But there's a lot of scenarios where it's great. You know, in Galactus decks, you do it beforehand, then you Galactus elsewhere, and they don't have any resources left in their hand to counter what you just did to them, that sort of thing. There's a lot of instances where Dr. Octopus can be good, but there is no doubt there is an inherent built portion of risk, and you kind of have to just hope for the best when you play that card. So that's why he gets a premium stat line. Then we look at a card like Red Skull, who is actually just nerfed. He had one of the craziest ratios in being a 5/15, and he's now a 5/13, but he's going to have the ongoing effect of enemy cards at this location have +1 power. Previously, it was +2 power. So in the end, it was like a 7 power difference. Now it's a 9 power difference. It's almost like a buff when you look at it that way, right? It's like a 5/9 if your opponent has 4 cards over there, right? Which is the vanilla standard. Whereas previously, if you had 4 cards at that opponent's location, it was a 5/7, which is below the vanilla standard. Isn't that crazy? What a weird change to make to this card, in my opinion. And they're trying to nerf Shuri, but it didn't. It just didn't. You made it from 30 to 26. So absolute buff, in my opinion, so far anyways, in most scenarios, or at least the popular scenarios at this moment in time. But anyways, so there you go. There's Red Skull. He's chilling all by himself in the offset plus. Like, we don't have any cards there. It's crazy to me. But maybe it's because of Zero existing, right? We can't print too many cards with bad abilities and high power totals, because then the removing abilities with like Sauron and Zero become too popular and too powerful. I don't know. We're already seeing that for the last few months, so maybe that really is the case. But it's funny enough, actually, I say that, but the Shuri Zero Red Skull deck, Zero is probably the more cuttable option. It's really Shuri Red Skull. So anyhow, it's pretty interesting to talk about. Last but not least, we have the 6 energy cards. Boom, we got the 6 energy cards. I even got my Pixel Hulk. Oh yeah, Hulk smash. So here we go. Not a single premium card. There is not a 6/13 in this game. Funny enough, though, that wasn't always the vanilla standard line, because Hulk up here was buffed to be a 6/12. He used to be a 6/11, dropping the vanilla standard line, and a lot of cards were then above it. We're talking like Magneto, for instance, right? And I can't even think of any other ones on the top of my head. Death, even, maybe, if you want to count that. I know she's obviously 9 and completely different, but she's got that 12 power stat line, right? So maybe that even counts. But for the most part, the vanilla stat line ended up shifting. And I don't know what that meant for the card design space. All right, and then we have our offset plus. Okay, so this is an extra little detail that I want to talk about, in that we have these cards that cost a lot, have incredibly high power, but they end up getting cheated out, right? We're talking Wave, Lockjaw, Jubilee. These are fantastic options to get some of these cards out. And obviously not just these. A lot of the offset negative even are pretty good if you look like Odin or whatever else. But for the most part, we can talk about Infinite, right? Notoriously, one of the best cards to get off of a Lockjaw cycle, or Jubilee, you know? Or Wave doesn't really work with that, but then you can Wave Death, Wave Destroyer, whatever else. So good. But then Destroyer, destroying all of your other cards. Normally that's pretty bad. You have to win 2 locations in Marvel Snap, and if you spend your turn 6 destroying your board, you're not in a good spot unless you set up for it, right? You got your Wolverine, your Bucky Barnes, your Nimrod, maybe you protected things with Armor and Professor X. So there's other ways to work with Destroyer, but needs an incredible amount of support. I just listed like 4 or 5 cards. You're going to need a few of them to make it work. Agatha Harkness, oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, RNG basically letting the game control for you, like seeing how that goes. I mean, there's some ways to make it work, but for the most part, yeah, that's why she's got a good stat line. And then there's also Giganto, who's on this list. He can't be played anywhere but the left location. And if that left location is unplayable, it's like Death's Domain or whatever, then you're screwed. You just can't play that card. And that's why he's got 14 power for 6 energy. Okay, so anyways, there you go. I know this is kind of different. I just wanted to talk about the ratios and how it kind of affects maybe card design space. And honestly, I just wanted to look into it in detail myself to see if I was wrong. And in conclusion, I was wrong about High Evolutionary having a poor stat line. A 4/7 is a premium stat line in Marvel Snap. I don't know if it's going to be that great to play still, even so, because it doesn't do anything, but I can't deny that it's not a bad turn to fill out your curve, right? Another thing I thought was interesting and why I wanted to raise stat lines as a topic is because we do a lot of custom cards on this channel, right? And in our Bearverse Discord. And I think this is a good framework to work off of when you're building your custom card. When you're thinking about, I got this cool ability, where should I put it? Offset negative, premium, offset plus, or should it just have the vanilla stat line because it's a very neutral ability, right? So something to think about in the card design space, okay? Anyways, thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I will catch you next time.